So has the buy-to-let changed the Oxfordshire property market? The buy-to-let mortgage is celebrating its silver anniversary this autumn, and it's pretty fascinating that a decision between a group of letting agents and bankers all that time ago to offer buy-to-let mortgages has actually changed the face of the Oxfordshire and the national property market. But the question is, has it been a good thing, or has it actually ruined the dreams of many 20 to 30 somethings wanting to get onto the property ladder in the last couple of decades? So I actually want to look deeper at the whole story, then I'll let you as the listener decide. And as soon as the buy-to-let mortgage was launched, it was clear there was an enthusiasm and a real need for this mortgage product. So much so that the size of the Oxfordshire private rented sector has grown exponentially. According to data, there are 15,980 private rented homes worth $8.5 billion. So now we're in 2021, it seems farcical that banks and building societies once thought that properties rented out to private tenants wouldn't actually create a steady income or actually increase in value. Yet this thought was conventional back in the 1990s. It's no wonder that buy-to-let landlords have been given a hard time with numbers like this. Yet before we burn every landlord at the stake, let's just actually look at the background story. The Conservatives introduced the right of a council house tenant to actually buy their own council house in the early 80s, which is fantastic news for council tenants. Yet when a council tenant bought their home, that meant that the council housing was taken away from future generations to rent, and therefore eroding the council housing stock available. Meaning from the early and mid 1990s, people would normally be eligible to rent from the council, yet who couldn't buy had only one option, and that obviously rent from a private landlord. Meanwhile, in the early to mid 1990s, we had 15% mortgage interest rates, unemployment rates of 9%, and the '89 housing crash fresh in people's memories. Repossessions were rife, making home ownership not the most attractive prospect for 20-somethings. Oxfordshire house prices dropped by 30% between 1989 and 93, and this meant as we entered the mid-90s, the Oxfordshire property market entered a period of stagnation. There were many Oxfordshire homeowners that bought their home in the property boom of the late 80s who were disinclined to sell the home for a loss. They were in negative equity, i.e. they actually owed more than what the house was worth. Yet they needed to move because of their growing families. Renting their home out could have allowed them to buy another home for their growing family, but most banks and building societies were still mostly unreceptive to the notion of these homeowners becoming accidental landlords. Most mortgage terms and conditions usually included clauses that prohibited homeowners from renting out their homes. So with growing demand from potential tenants, supply reduced from the sale of council houses, and many homeowners in negative equity, all bound up by the semi-deregulation of the private rented sector with the Housing Act of 1988, you can see that the buy-to-let mortgage came along at exactly the right time. Take up the buy-to-let mortgages was slow in the first couple of years, and by the millennium, according to the Council of Mortgage Lenders, there were just over 120,000 buy-to-let mortgages with a total value of $9 billion. Yet as we entered the 2000s, it really took off, with every man and his dog jumping onto the buy-to-let bandwagon. So much so that today in the UK, there are 4.4 million private rented homes, 2.1 million of them with buy-to-let mortgages, totaling 234 billion, which is 11% of the UK's GDP. That's more than a 1,650% increase to landlords and a 2,470 increase in the value of those mortgages. And since 2001, the number of privately rented households in the UK has grown from 8% to 19%. On the face of it, you could say that with the growth of these buy-to-let landlords with their cheap buy-to-let mortgages and often unkempt properties, it has punished potential home buyers into squalor. Yet, let's look at it again a little deeper. Most Oxfordshire landlords are very fair with their tenants, providing them with clean, well-presented and affordable housing. Of course, there are the rogue landlords, but with TV shows such as Landlords from Hell, the British public are given a distorted and a fairly uneven view of private landlords as a whole. Private sector landlords have played a critical role in providing homes to millions of Brits in this country. The UK population has grown by 405,000 people per year for the last 20 years, yet only 22,000 council houses have been built per year in the same time frame. If it wasn't for the private rented sector, who would have housed all of the extra people in this country over the last 20 years? What about the exorbitant rents? Would it surprise you that the rents have risen below inflation between 2008 and 19? And there's also been a drive to tax buy-to-let landlords more comprehensively and regulate the private rented sector to develop better housing conditions for tenants. Unlike owner-occupier homes, tenants get the benefit of new regulations from gas safety checks, electrical safety reports, and also buy-to-let landlords will need to improve their energy performance certificate to at least a C rating by the end of 2025 for all new tenancies, and by end of 2028 for all existing tenancies, all at no cost to the tenant and directly saving them money on their heating costs and bills. Something that is very important considering the recent rises in gas prices. Oxford landlords have also had to pay more tax on their Oxford buy-to-let properties, paying 3% stamp duty. The supplement for the last 5 years as higher rate tax relief on mortgage interest was taken away 4 years ago. Landlords have also had to deal with the financial fallout of the pandemic. It is estimated 1 in 5 tenants in the private rental sector have some form of rent arrears. And interestingly, landlords that don't use a letting agent to manage their property are 272% more likely to be 2 months or more in arrears. Also, evictions for rent arrears were banned during the pandemic, meaning some tenants, they actually ran up arrears of up to 12 months or more. And according to the National Residential Landlords Association, this has left 210,000 private tenants in the country facing a court order for rent arrears. That would equate to 860 properties rented in Oxfordshire in the arrears. The idea that Oxfordshire landlords are middle-class establishment types who are out to take advantage of Oxfordshire tenants who can't afford to buy their own homes is, in my opinion, wrong. Of course, there are some very rogue landlords, and yet there are plenty of rogue tenants. Just because you're an Oxfordshire landlord, it doesn't mean you are quaffing champagne, rolling around in the cash. The 2,870 landlords own just one buy-to-let property, and just under half of those use their rental income to supplement their pensions. And according to the NRLA, a third of landlords have a gross income, excluding income from the buy-to-let, of less than 20 grand a year. It's hard work being an Oxfordshire buy-to-let landlord, and I still believe the burden of housing just under a fifth of the UK population isn't appreciated or taken seriously by the government. Notwithstanding the challenges that most Oxfordshire buy-to-let landlords are in for in the long run, mortgages can be secured for less than 1%, and demand is on the rise with rents rising at the highest rate for 10 years. Of course, Brexit caused quite a few issues with some Oxfordshire landlords losing some Eastern European migrants. Yet once things settled down, we will have an influx of people coming from Hong Kong, Afghanistan, wanting to settle down, get jobs, and ultimately require a home to live in, which will, of course, be a private rented house. I know the stamp duty tax holiday has cleared out the Oxfordshire landlords who are on the fence for staying in the private rented sector or selling up. But those Oxfordshire landlords that are left will be more professional and will run their buy-to-let portfolio as a business and not just a hobby. My final piece of advice to anybody thinking of becoming a buy-to-let landlord in Oxfordshire for the first time is that you have to have a strategy. You have to plan ahead. Those who stumbled into the buy-to-let market in the early 2000s made a lot of money without any strategy and any tactics. Moving forward, you need the guidance and the support of somebody or an agent who can tell you the best places for investment, be that for better yield or better capital growth. They will also be able to tell you what tenants demand to ensure that you attract the right sort of tenants who won't trash your place and leave you in the arrears. If you'd like any advice on this, more than happy to help. This is Damion from Fine & Country, Oxfordshire. Thank you.